You're listening to Packers Talk Network.
PackersTalk.com.
Welcome to the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of PackersTalk.com network. I'm your host, Miles Teddick, joined by our co-host, Tim Hamilton. We are diehard Packers fans, just love talking about the Pack. We're not getting into national sports media talking points. We're sticking to real football, and we're sticking to the Packers. We're diving into the top topics around the Packers every week, breaking down games during the season and sorting through all the drama and the rumors of the offseason. If y'all want to support this podcast, please spike that like button for us. Give us a follow on all the socials and subscribe to the Packers Talk YouTube channel. Those things help us out a lot. Don't take you very much time or effort, so greatly appreciated. And before we get started, a few words from our sponsor, Wisconsin's own Ticket King. For over 30 years, Ticket King has been providing Packers tickets to Packers fans. You can find them on the web at theticketking.com or visit their locations in Green Bay and Milwaukee. For direct links to specific Packers games, go to PackersTalk.com/tickets or browse their website at theticketking.com. Good evening, Tim. How you doing, sir?
Good evening. Doing good. How are you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Dodging some bad weather down here in the DFW area, but we're okay. You know, we're hanging in there. Hopefully that keeps it up, but other than that, doing pretty good, man. Not getting too bored in the off season yet. I'm sure that'll come.
I got to ask you, how are your, pectorals doing, since that seems to be the new injury going around Green Bay?
Hey, everybody, be careful, right? Like get stretched out before you do anything dangerous, right? Let's keep everything, within our capacity. You try to do too much. That's when you tear these muscles, right? And so let's just take it easy. I certainly don't want to be tearing any pectorals right now. That sounds painful. I've never had that kind of an injury.
I don't even think I have pectorals, so I think I'm okay.
Come on, Tim. Just get a few push-ups.
It's just weird. Like, the head coach does it. Like, what's LaFleur doing that he's tearing a pec? And now Zach Tom and Tucker Kraft. Like,
they're just getting after it in the weight room, man. They're probably loading up on bench, right?
Yeah.
Gotta get the plates on there, and coach is probably getting overly competitive with the guys, trying to do too much. I don't know. This is now just sort of like a whimsical fantasy of like a caricature of a badass head coach. But hey, LaFleur is kind of a badass head coach. I think so anyway. I'm on the LaFleur fan bandwagon. But yeah, I mean we've talked about him actually almost this time last year, right? We're almost a year into the podcast here. I won't tie you to this, but you can take it if you will. But I was very, very optimistic. My stock on LaFleur this time last year was very high, and now it's even higher. And we took a dip there for a little bit. There were some questions. We even got close to questioning whether he needed to be the leader of this team long term, and now we've gone way back up. So yeah. But yeah, man, I mean, speaking of LaFleur, where would you have him, amongst the coaches in the league at this point? Is he elevating to that like elite level yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, he's top 10 for me. I don't know how far into that top 10 he is. Like if I could go top 5, maybe. But he's getting there. And I think the second half of the season, we were sitting here at 2-5, and it was kind of like, wow, if this keeps going south like this, there's going to be some conversations about LaFleur at the end of the year. And then they turned it around and, went on their run to make the playoffs and win a playoff game. The fact he did that with a young roster and a first-time starting quarterback and not getting a lot of contributions from special teams or defense,
right,
really held him back. And his offense finally showing what it could be, running what he wants them to run. It was impressive. So, yeah, I think 2023 was maybe not his best coaching job. It was probably among the top 2. I think he did a really good job in 2019 as a first-time head coach. I think those 2 seasons, 2019, 2023, were his 2 best jobs. But I think 2022, when everything went south with the team, I had a lot of questions about him. I don't think he or the coaching staff had a good year, and
No.
there were a ton of factors that played into that. And so now they were moving on in 23 with Jordan Love. And it was like, we're finally going to get to see this Matt LaFleur offense that we would see at times, but we saw a lot of the McCarthy stuff because that's what the previous quarterback wanted to run. So it
Right.
was like, you never got this full dose of it. And then we got to see that in 2023, and it looked pretty damn good the second half of the season.
Right.
And when you factor in how young they were, their top running back missed a ton of time, first time starting quarterback, shuffling along the offensive line. Their left tackle played one game. Like, all that factored into it, and they still were able to build on offense and get better by the end of the season. So I think he did a really good job. Like I said, I think he's a top 10 coach. I know there's, we could go through it and debate who's he better than, all that stuff, but he's one of the better coaches in the league. I'm very optimistic about it. I love the look of the offense, the design of it, how they used all their weapons. And it's pretty crazy that they never really played with all their weapons. There was tight ends missing time. There's receivers in and out of the lineup. Aaron Jones missed a ton. Like, they didn't have everybody, but he took advantage of who was in there, whether it was guys like Malik Heath and Bo Melton and, guys that were down the depth chart. They made it work. So that to me is a good sign. And I think not to, keep going on about LaFleur, but what most impressed me last season was when they were sitting there at 2-5 and 3-6. He never lost a team, and they very easily could have went down the tubes. And instead, he got it turned around. The players bought into it, and the players believed in him, and they followed his lead, and were able to turn it into a 9-win season and a playoff appearance. So, yeah, I think he's one of the better head coaches in the league with still a lot of room left to grow.
Totally agree, man. And that follows. You did a good job of like really tracking the ups and downs there. That kind of follows it for me. And the thing for me, the real question mark last season, where it was like, shoot, is he the guy? Was when problems didn't seem to be getting corrected. Right, like there were a few weeks in a row there where you and I were talking about. Looks like this is the problem. We see it again. I think this is the problem. This certainly seems like the problem. I was like, why isn't the problem getting fixed? And I called it out multiple times, but, it was the week after the bye week when they, shook things up, I think is what we said. We got to shake things up. And after that, that's when everything seemed to click. And, we'll, like we said, we'll never probably find out what actually happened there. My speculation was that he took over a little bit more leadership of the offense. Maybe he was trying to distance himself and hopefully allow Stenavich to maybe take a little bit more of a leadership role. Again, who knows what happened there, because at almost the same time, we believe he had to really take some reins in the defense as well. So I don't know that he's capable of, I shouldn't say capable, but I just don't know that he would have done both. It just doesn't seem like a feasible thing in the middle of the season for the head coach. But yeah, you really, what you wanted to see was that he was going to solve a problem. It's like, hey, leader, you're supposed to be the leader of men here. Solve the problem, like turn the ship, shake things up, whatever you want to call it. And it just got so close, like, man, I don't think he's going to do it. And then he did, right? And not only did he shake things up, turn things around, like show us the right momentum, man. I mean, he took it a lot further than I think any of us thought possible. But you called out something, I think it was right, in 22 when things were seemingly falling apart. My question about him in that season was, is he enough of a, I don't want to use the term alpha because that gets a little bit, thrown around and misunderstood. But, is he enough of a leader, the guy who is willing to take the reins of the group to correct the ship in 2022? And, he obviously, you've got competing leadership, I think, between him and Rodgers and maybe even some other areas of the team. And that's tough. I would almost say that's a tougher leadership challenge than what he faced last season when the majority, you're the youngest team in the league. The majority of the team is just, what, they're kids to him. Whereas like he and Rodgers are aren't they almost the same age or
That's pretty close.
right there? Yeah. They're kind of social peers, right? And that's where it's I think a much tougher battle to lead your peers than it is to lead folks you're naturally, I don't want to say superior to, but you just kind of have that seniority over. And we're obviously talking coach to players, but it's still humans in the building. And so that to me was a big question mark in 2022. Couldn't be solved until 2023, right? Like that wasn't something, I think it played out the way it had to, right? Rodgers goes where he's going to go, and then the team, you get who they're going to be in 2023. The question then was, can he corral this group? Was he being carried by Rodgers' talent, or can he corral this group and, like you're saying, put his offense in that we were all so hungry to see and actually create that momentum? He did. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm like, okay, like he really rose to the challenge, to the occasion as a leader and as a coach, though, call it the last two off seasons. What's he doing now? I don't think you're just staying the same, right? He's either getting better or he's getting worse. That's kind of a cliche. So I'm excited to see this next chapter of LaFleur. In my opinion, and a lot of what we talk about now at this part of the offseason and going forward is a lot of projection onto the season of 2024, not where does a person stand based solely on what they've done so far. Projecting LaFleur onto this next season, I think he's a top 5 coach, man, and I think that it's wrong that he hasn't won Coach of the Year yet. Like, and yes. I agree with you. I think those two, 2019 and 2023, were the two best cases for it, but didn't win it. Whatever, should have, and that's where I'm like, okay, if he's getting better, he should be a candidate for Coach of the Year this year. Now, will he be if Jordan Love just continues to get better, or does Jordan Love only get the credit for that, right? Does he fall back into like a Belichick trap where it's like, well, you can't be Coach of the Year because you actually are the best coach, and it's reserved for somebody who's overachieving, I guess.
Yeah, and you bring up Jordan Love and Rodgers too. Like, yes, he walked in having Aaron Rodgers, and I think that's where it's been overlooked in the national media why he hasn't gotten Coach of the Year, because everybody just looked and said, well, he's got Aaron Rodgers, so he's not really the reason why they're having success, and that's a bunch of crap. Like, walking in with Aaron Rodgers, yes, it's a great thing, but it's also extremely difficult. And it was like that from the beginning. I mean, Rodgers came out and said when LaFleur was hired, like, he wanted input in it, and he never got input. And he kind of just talked with LaFleur after LaFleur was hired. There was a whole audible thing that went on the first off season. And like, you're going into an environment where the entire franchise is centered around the quarterback. So you have to make that relationship work. And it's a quarterback who's established in his ways, who's extremely strong, opinionated person, and wants to do things how he's always done them. So he had this offense that he wanted to bring with him and install, and he could only do bits and pieces of that. And he had to incorporate an offense that was completely foreign to him, McCarthy's old system, because that's what Rodgers wanted to keep. Like, it was not easy for him to walk in as this young first-time head coach and try to set the culture, establish that relationship with Rodgers, and get Rodgers to buy into it. Because if Rodgers doesn't buy in, LaFleur's not here right now.
Right.
Like, that's tough. And yes, I mean, he had a Hall of Fame quarterback to start, but he had to do a lot of delicate, tiptoeing with Rodgers to kind of make everything work. And that wasn't easy. And then he transitions to very quickly. It wasn't even much of a transition. It was after one season. Then he's got to deal with the fact that Jordan Love gets drafted to eventually replace Rodgers. So now he's dealing with that whole dynamic and trying to get Jordan Love, up to speed and ready to go and develop him, while at the same time knowing that Rodgers is there and doesn't like the fact that Jordan Love's on the team. And then he's developing Jordan Love to be the next quarterback. So, yeah, and you can look at the success that LaFleur had with Rodgers. McCarthy hadn't had that success with Rodgers in several years. So you can't just say, well, you had Rodgers. Well, McCarthy had him too.
That was
And
always my counter to that. Is like
yeah,
McCarthy had him the very previous season and got fired because they
right.
were not playing well.
And things were starting to go downhill before that. And it's like, well, McCarthy had the same quarterback.
Right.
So,
What happened?
LaFleur's got right. What happened? LaFleur's got him, and now they're winning 13 games 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think from a national standpoint, he's severely underrated, and it kind of pisses me off because over the last several years, everybody talks about Sean McVay, rightfully so. I get it. People
Yeah.
talk about Kyle Shanahan, I get it. But
Yeah.
LaFleur's from that tree too, and he always gets forgotten about. Nobody talks about him. People are bringing up Mike McDaniel, and I like Mike McDaniel. He's had nowhere near the success that LaFleur's had.
No.
Why is he suddenly jumping LaFleur? Why is LaFleur not ever mentioned with McVay and Shanahan? I know he hasn't gotten to a Super Bowl. He doesn't have a ring like McVay, but he's part of
Neither
that
does
trade.
McDaniel.
Neither does McDaniel, right? And that's what I'm saying. Like LaFleur's part of that, and he just kind of gets overlooked. And I don't get it from a national standpoint. I think Packer fans know and have a greater appreciation for LaFleur. But just from a national perspective, it's irritating to see that. And it's like, this guy's.
I agree.
Look at his record. Just look at his record.
It's fantastic. I mean, it's the second best, I think, all time, right? Like he's got the second best all time win percentage of a head coach to start. Like it's crazy.
And look what he's had to deal with.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And so yeah, I think as far as where he stands in the league right now, I'm definitely a little bit biased in that I want him to win that Coach of the Year award. I want him to kind of be validated finally for the performance he's had so far, and the challenges he's fought through. Real quick, shout out Matthew Tan. Good to have you back hanging with us. Said I was looking forward to the show last night, but it was a holiday. Glad y'all are back. We're good to be back. Good to see you, Matthew. And yes, we sat one out last night. Had some family activities going on, and just could not wrap up in time to make this possible. So, but shout out. I hope everybody had a wonderful Memorial Day. Took a little time to think about the fallen and that have sacrificed to make things like this podcast and this day possible. So thank y'all, and thank you again. Shout out Matthew for tuning in and hey, sharing the show. Even got friends to listen in. And you got tickets to the Rams game. All right, very good,
Nice.
Very good. Definitely let us know what games y'all are going to. Always a great time to go out to Lambeau. Catching the Packers in person anytime is, even if it's somewhere else, is a treat. So I do hope you enjoy that, sir. Clint Stoner back in here with us. Good to see you. Coach of the Year, Super Bowl champs, and then the draft in GB going to be a great year. Love it. Love the optimism.
Amen.
Speak it into existence.
There you go.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's easy for us to look at player development and look at players and who's good at this, top 5 this. And I think right now everybody's talking a lot about rankings, ranking this position group in the North or whatever. And that's all fun off-season talk. It's fair. It's, who knows? The season's full of surprises. But we don't often talk about the progression of head coaches or coaches in general, I think. And, you just mentioned there's kind of a crew really emerging from this McVay tree and the Shanahan tree, I should say. And LaFleur does get kind of overlooked even when he's got objective numbers on his side, and it's just like this excuse and that excuse. And so I wonder where other people hold him right now and what they think of him. I know another thing that we learned this week that was, not massive news, but still information nonetheless about the joint practices. I believe it was at Denver and who else?
Baltimore
and Denver, yeah. So one thing I want to call out about these joint practices, and we talked about this a little bit last season because they had the Patriots in, but I think that is an exercise just as much for the coaching staff as it is for the players. When you bring in like a Bill Belichick, right? You get to see firsthand how he's running his team for a few days. Now you may not get to sit in all the meetings and all that, but you have him right there. You have access to him in a way that you otherwise, I don't imagine would, right? Maybe in the off season. But as a young coach like LaFleur is, getting that experience has got to be just invaluable. I don't know how you put a price on that. And when I looked at who we got this year, I was looking at it again like, it's another coaching staff that he can learn from. And say what we will, I know we've got some mixed feelings about Sean Payton, but he has won a Super Bowl, and he has had success in the league. He's revered as an offensive mind. If you're LaFleur, you've got to be looking at that guy as somebody you can learn something from.
Sure.
Certainly Harbaugh.
Yeah.
No question about Harbaugh and the success that he's had. So that's something that I think is worth looking at, worth sort of thinking about. How good is LaFleur? Where does he stand in the league, and the progression of a coach? I think it's very interesting to see how he might be growing as a coach and what he might be doing to achieve that. But yeah, what do you think about those joint practices, man?
I think it's great. I like that they've been doing them. LaFleur's been a big fan of them since he got to Green Bay, and I think it's beneficial for the team. It's interesting this year that they're only doing one practice with each team because the second day always seems to turn into fights, and it gets out of hand, which I know last year with the Patriots it did, and they've had those issues in the past. So it makes sense to just do one day. Yeah, I mean, I think it's Sean Payton. I'm not the biggest fan, but he does have a ring. He had success in New Orleans. I can't deny that. So it'll be interesting. LaFleur can see how he runs his team, how he runs his practice, and then to get the Ravens into Green Bay, even though it's for one day, I definitely pick John Harbaugh's brain. I mean, they're going to test you physically. They're always a physical football team. So, how do they get that way? That would be something to me. If I was LaFleur, I'd be watching for, like, what are they doing drill wise? Like, what are they teaching their players? Like, stuff like that you can pick up on. So, yeah, I think the joint practices are beneficial. It's nice to go against a different offense and a different defense than what you see every day in practice. It gives you different looks, things to prepare for. And I know just from like looking at the Ravens and their defensive structure is now being copied. Like they've had Mike McDonald got hired for a head coaching job in Seattle. He came from Baltimore. A lot of their other assistant coaches got coordinator jobs around the league. So like that system's being copied. Now you get to see it in practice, and maybe you pick up a thing or two on it that can, be useful information for when you see one of those defenses down the line. So, yeah, I like that. I like that LaFleur has been doing them. I like that he's doing, two different teams now. It's beneficial to the players, and I think it can be beneficial to the staff as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. And it's I think it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. But another thing that's going to be interesting, and this is a relatively recent development here, is might OTAs be on the chopping block? Like the end of OTAs might be near. Have you heard about this?
Yeah, I did. I saw that come out today, and kind of surprised that it seems like it's coming from the Players Association.
Yeah. I was surprised by this, to be honest.
Yeah, and there's already, like, I've seen out there some players are pushing back saying that we don't want this. None of the players. So why is the NFLPA executive team like coming up with this proposal? Like, it sounds weird. My own opinion is this is all tied to they're going to go to 18 games. Roger Goodell's been talking about it like openly now over the last few weeks.
That's what I was thinking.
It's coming. So this is kind of like, all right, you want to go to 18 games? We don't want to be there for the off season. And here's our idea. We're going to show up in late June, early July. We'll ramp it up. And then it's training camp and into the regular season. Like, we don't want to be there April and May, get rid of that. We're going to be on vacation kind of thing from the players. Like, that's your trade-off to get your 18th game, which they have to negotiate that with the players. But if the owners want 18 games, they're going to get 18 games. Like, there's just the players aren't going to be able to fight them enough to, win that battle. And it always comes down to money, especially when you're talking about the owners and the commissioner and the changes they want to make to the game. It's always about the money. It's not about what the fans think or what the fans want or what the players or coaches or anybody else. It's how they can put more money in their pockets. And that's what the 18th game was about. And this whole, potential change to the offseason, the coaches aren't going to like it. The front office guys aren't going to like it because they got that break from like the middle of June to the end of July. That was like vacation time. The kids are out of school, the families. And now that's all going to go away, or they're going to get a little bit of that in April and May, but the kids are still in school. It kind of is it's going to throw that whole thing off. And I don't think any of them are going to be happy about it. There's probably going to be players that aren't happy about it. But the owners don't care about the coaches. So what?
Yeah. It seems like what the owners want, the owners eventually
Yeah.
get. Now, I have seen mixed reviews on this because I saw a few reports on Twitter that the players seem to want this. Kurt Bankert was one that I saw weigh in on it, said that it makes all the sense in the world and that the players would want it. So I guess he knows of some at least that would, because he's, not too far removed from the locker room. But yeah, it's just interesting. I think, I was trying to think about it from a fan's perspective. Like, yeah, would I rather get a little bit of action there, in May and, get a little bit of a sneak peek at the rookies and that kind of thing? Or, are we really going to just go from, all right, draft and then, see you July 1st or maybe the last week of June? That's where it's like, dang, that seems like a jump, but okay, whatever. Not that it matters to for the fans what our opinion is, but I just think it's a very interesting shakeup. Anytime you have changes like this, you're going to have all the coaches and front office guys trying to study and strategize different ways to find advantages and whatever that may be. And so that's why I'm kind of interested to see, how do they approach this? Are you going to give the players a big gap there from basically, and they're not even involved around the draft time. So like the guys that are there, you don't see them really. They leave in February and they don't come back until May, right? Is that it? Am I missing something in there?
They do start them in like the middle of April, where they'll come back in.
Where they're just doing the strength and conditioning. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, they're not on the field or anything.
So you probably still maintain that.
Yeah. So. And the other thing is, like, the NFL's made it now that they've stretched their schedule out. So it's almost like there's something always going on, except they do hit that dead period, like the middle of June to the end of July.
Right.
But they have, like, Super Bowl ends, and a few weeks later it's the combine. Then it's free agency. Then it's the draft. And then OTAs and minicamp, which aren't as big, but at least there's something going on.
Yeah.
So now it's almost like, okay, you're going to do Super Bowl, combine, like all that's going to stay. But then after the draft, it's kind of going to be a dead period. And then you're going to ramp up again. Like, do they want to have a dead period in May and June? Or do you want that dead period in June and July, like how it currently is? So it's, I don't know. I would think you kind of want it as is. But then again, if you look at it, May, there's playoffs going on and there's other sports that are going on, whereas their current schedule right now, there's nothing in June and July or late June and July other than baseball. So like if football was around and they were doing something, they really could, again, get like all the attention, even if it was just training camp practices.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. Now, I wonder how it is going to shake out, and this isn't a thing as much anymore, and I wonder how much this is just guys adapting and trying to behave themselves, but like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, one of the topics in the offseason was, will guys get in trouble? Will they get hurt? There was some interesting storylines that came out of the offseasons there for a while. One guy blowing his hand off. Who was that? Was that Justin Tuck? I can't remember who it was. One of the defensive linemen from the Giants who blows his hand off. Pierre Paul. That's who it was. Paul. I knew it was one of those guys.
Crazy.
It's just stuff like that. It's just like, and I remember one of the front office or head coaches, somebody like that was talking about the most, nervous that they get is that period where guys leave the facility and they don't see them again until training camp. And you're just wondering, are guys going to behave themselves? Are they going to come back in shape? What's going to happen? And that's where I'm wondering, like, how are they going to structure this so that you minimize that? Because I know they got to be thinking that. You got to be thinking, how do I minimize the amount of time guys have to go do something stupid? And how do I minimize the amount of time that guys are away from the facility so we're maximizing essentially how much we're getting them to get better? But, just the control of it, right? If there's something that the owners in the league want more than money or as much as money, it's control, right? Isn't
Of
it?
course. Yeah.
So
I just think about the Packers this past season. Their season ended what, mid to late January. So then
yeah,
they weren't back in Green Bay until right before, like a week before the draft.
right.
But now they're there through, the middle of June, and then they're gone. So I guess it would just be spreading out. Whereas, like, if this new schedule becomes reality, if they were done the middle of January, you wouldn't see those players again until late June. That's a long time. Like you're saying, off the field stuff, but are they taking care of their bodies? Like, are we going to have guys showing up out of shape because they haven't been in the facility in so long?
Now, I
I don't
think
know.
that's less of a
But
problem these
it
days.
probably is these days, but still, or are they going to have more time to be working out and get themselves hurt?
Exactly. Are you doing things? And this is always just human nature, right? Like people always with something, they think they know better, right? You want me to do it that way? I'll do that way with you, but I'm gonna go do it this way on my own, right? There's always little things like that exist. So I'm sure that comes into play. I think it's going to be very interesting to see how that plays out, and I wonder, from a fan perspective, what are we going to get there, and how's that going to affect everything? But again, we're in the background. We don't matter.
Matter.
We're just here to pay money to see these things.
Yeah.
Nick's got a good point here. Appreciate you jumping in with us, Nick. Good to see you, sir. Need a second bye as well. Yeah, if you're going to get 18 games, if you're going to get this end of OTAs and an extended training camp, I think a second bye has to be almost non-negotiable. I can't see the players being okay with all of this, especially the NFLPA. And really, even the front office and head coaches, you need that time to rest guys up and kind of reevaluate certain things. I don't know. That's got to be par for, or like standard, right? Like an ante for the table.
I would think so. Like, can you imagine adding an 18th game and you get your bye week in like week 5, and then you got to go all that rest of the way without a week off? Like, I don't know. That
would be a stretch.
It's already pretty bad for some. The teams getting early bye with 17 games. You add another week to it. Yeah, I would think you'd have to do another bye, but again, it's going to come down to money, and they may say, well, we don't want 2 weeks or teams having 2 weeks off. Then that's, some of the weeks might really get watered down as far as having teams on bye weeks and the schedule not being as great those weeks. Like, I don't know, but for me, I definitely would think they need a second bye just to, player health and safety, which they always talk about, but that player health and safety only means we're doing it for money. Like,
you got to learn how to translate these things, right, in order to understand them properly.
Exactly.
No, so we'll see what they come out with, and honestly, it was kind of weird. I just didn't know how to really think about it. Like, how am I against this? Am I for it? I don't know. I'm interested to see. I think mostly the player perspectives. What are they gonna be for it or against it? But yeah, quick shout out here. Our friend Matthew's got a friend. His best friend is Carly. She's a Packer maniac. Shout out to Carly. We love Packer maniacs. Hope you're joining us tonight. And shout out to you. Go Pack Go. And then Tyler's got an interesting point here. Thanks for joining us, Tyler. Good to see you. I know it's sort of off topic. Kind of not, though. We're talking about the offseason. Thinks UFL, not UFOs. Very different topic. UFL should be affiliated with the NFL like the G League is. More people would watch, and practice squad guys would get legit playing time in the spring. I think that this is being talked about more than the league wants people to know. And the reason I think that is you've already got competition with players. Like, there are guys that are playing is it the UFL or USFL, whatever it is now, that they could be at the bottom of NFL rosters, and some of them might be, but you've also got guys that have said, no, I'm not going to play in the NFL. I'm going to play in this league. What was it? I think it was A.J. McCarron that did that. Now, it's not like the NFL is just heartbroken because, he's one quarterback isn't going to play with him, but that's a seed. That won't be, I don't think, an isolated incident, especially if you get the NFL doing things that the players eventually are like, no, man, I'm done with this crap. You're seeing a little bit of the, rebellious behavior with guys retiring earlier, right? Like you've got a few linebackers that have done it recently. Megatron, obviously retired earlier. The most famous one is probably Barry Sanders. Unfortunately, all of those are Lions. Just can't catch a break, can you guys? But yeah, so I think that's the tension from that is already there. Obviously, the NFL doesn't want to draw attention to that problem, but I think they'd be a little silly or foolish not to be working on something of that nature. And that's something, would front office and coaches support it? Hell yeah, they'd have to. Are you kidding me? You get more tape on guys. You get more reps for guys. You get more exposure to different guys. That's coaches and players. I think that's only beneficial to that side of the fence. So, very good point there, Tyler, about UFL or USFL being affiliated with the NFL, similar to the G League. I know that's been brought up before. I totally agree. I think it should happen. And from a revenue perspective, you've got more football on. Tim, you were just talking about it, and we've talked about it several times now, this gap of the offseason where we all get really bored and start to talk about nonsense, which we are not going to do here. If we're going to talk about things, it'll just be Packers nonsense. But we're not getting into – there's just silly predictions that start happening this time of year, or a guy does something cool in shorts and now all of a sudden he's the most underrated guy in the league, and it's just like that kind of stuff is just too much. I get, I don't know, it's like you hear that once or twice, like ooh, and then you hear it again, you're like, okay, enough. So yeah, we're not going to get into that kind of stuff, but I think these types of conversations are a lot of fun as far as how could you change the offseason, make it better for the players, the coaches, the front office, the fans even. And that's a great idea. So what do you think about that, Tim? Sorry, I don't want to cut you off there.
I mean, they had NFL Europe back in, what was that, the 90s?
Yeah.
And that was like their league. It was just based in Europe, and Kurt Warner came out of there.
Yeah.
I'm a little surprised like they don't have some kind of affiliation with these. I don't even know if it's two leagues now, if they're combined in one league.
I think they combined.
I thought so, but I wasn't sure. I don't follow it much, but I'm surprised they don't have some kind of affiliation where teams send, practice squad guys or like a handful of players there. Plus there's other, the players that are unsigned that get to play like they currently are. Because you've seen in the past where the season ends and NFL teams sign some of these guys and bring them to training camp. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't it make sense to take some of the guys that are already on your off-season roster and send them there, even if it's in the springtime where they would, normally be in the building? Like if you said every team's going to allocate like 5 players or something, let those players go and get real reps instead of, being third or fourth string and not getting a ton of reps in OTAs. Like let them get live football reps.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. Yeah, I'm a little surprised they don't have something like that. And again, like you're saying, they could make some money off of it potentially, which is all they care about anyway. So
we all know that. We all know that. Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. I'd like to see something like that. It seems like they are moving towards it. And when they got rid of NFL Europe, and of course it had to be some kind of money thing or something, I was surprised. I was a young fan of the NFL at that point. I was very surprised when that went away because that was the only thing in the summer that they had going on. It's like, why would you get rid of this? That doesn't make any sense. So, yeah. As far as that goes, I do hope that they're moving in a direction like that. Tyler makes a good point. Think about the development of a Clifford and a Pratt, more money at Lambeau, get more fans in the summers. Think students are out of school. They get an opportunity to come up there. There's a lot of upside for it, I believe. And, hopefully they are moving in that direction. But, time will tell.
And I don't think
I wanted to go back to a shout out here real quick. Michael Redden, thanks for jumping in with us, Michael. Good to see you. We already know Fangio style defense. think it'll be beneficial to practice against our style of defense. This was in regard to the joint practices. I wanted to bring this up. Good point as far as knowing how to beat that. But yeah,
Right.
that's why these joint practices are kind of an interesting thing to think about. Like, what is the motivation, and who's involved in the negotiating of who's going to practice with who and all of that. And so I find it really interesting so far who they've had at joint practices with in LaFleur's era. But wanted to come back to that. I thought you made a good point on that one, Michael. But and then real quick, Matt jumping back in here, when we're going to get a player to come on the show and get their feedback? Matthew, I have the same question. I want to know when we're going to get a player on this show. Maybe sooner than later, man. We are making efforts. I'll say that, right? We're at least trying. We're reaching out to some guys and seeing if they have the time or the interest to join us. We are but a small Packers podcast so far, so we got to earn our standing a little bit before we can get that, but we are working on it. And then Chris C. jumping in with us, first time catching the show live. Thanks for joining us, Chris. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you. All right, so now we're talking about offseason OTAs, all this kind of stuff. We haven't really put much of input into the most recent OTAs. So, Tim, what were your takeaways from our most recent Packer OTAs here?
So, I mean, there's not a whole lot to go on based off of one practice, but a couple things that stood out to me was they had basically perfect attendance. They had one player who wasn't there, but he had a
big thumbs up.
Yeah, he had a family emergency, so in theory he would have been there. So they've had perfect attendance, and apparently, according to LaFleur, it's the best attendance they've had since he's been head coach. I know they have bonus money tied to some of that, where players have to show up or else they're losing bonus money, but Jair walked away from $700,000 last year when he didn't show up. He's showing up and he's been there every day this year. So
he made his point.
Yeah, we can read into that and speculate about that, but I think we've gone there before about what his motivation was for that. But just having everybody there, I think, is a great thing. And we saw who's injured, which unfortunately there are a few guys that are injured. Nothing that's long term. We talked at the top of the show about Zach Tom, Tucker Kraft having the torn pectoral muscles. We'll see them at some point during training camp. It doesn't sound like there's any threat or risk of them not being ready for the regular season, but just from how the Packers handle injuries, I would be surprised if they're ready day one of training camp and cleared to go. I would think you're probably going to be a couple weeks into camp before we see those guys, maybe after family night, like whenever they do family night. That's usually a couple weeks in. But one good piece of injury news, and it's kind of shocking. Kingsley Enabare's full go.
Yeah,
doesn't even have a brace.
Bring that up.
I mean, he was the one that came out and said after the Dallas game he had a torn ACL, and it was like, okay. And then all of a sudden, I think it was LaFleur mentioned it at one of his press conferences around the draft or at the owners' meeting or something, but that he didn't. Turns out he didn't tear his ACL, and he didn't even have surgery on it. And it almost sounded like he was still like they were still working through it, and maybe he would need surgery. But he's full go. He was practicing without a brace on. I mean, that's it's shocking, but it's great news, and it certainly improves their depth at edge rusher. It was a little bit of a surprise to me that they didn't draft anybody at edge rusher, and maybe that's part of the reason why is because they knew Enagbare is good to go. So that was great news. Other than that, not a ton to take out of it. I'm sure we're going to mention Christian Watson and his hamstrings. But just that, everybody was there.
Chris with the comment on Enagbare, no knee sleeve. Dude.
Yeah, that's
for real. That is wild. Yeah. Maybe he didn't tear it fair, but
right.
To have it injured bad enough that you thought you did, and now this just only this far removed, and you're not even in a brace.
Yeah, that's shocking. So, I mean, he definitely didn't tear it, or else he wouldn't be practicing.
Right.
But he did something to it. But I don't know. I guess it wasn't
very crazy.
Wasn't too bad, whatever he did to it.
Yeah, that was really shocking. When I was excited, I heard, oh, he's practicing cool. I'm thinking, like doing some things, loosening up, and he's like out there with no brace, no sleeve, no nothing, and looks good. Doesn't look like he's
Yeah.
Limping, ginger, limiting himself or anything. So yeah, they always, they have more information than we do. But yeah, not drafting a D lineman, an edge rusher, you've got a lot of depth in both of those places. So I don't think that that should have been too much of a surprise for us. I was very excited to see that. I think you're right though. It's just like the attendance, even the injury list. It's not long and it doesn't seem
bad.
serious. So ultimately, and speaking of injuries, Christian Watson was out there running. Looked like without any limitations. So
yeah, we found out about. I learned about asymmetry and percentages of strength and hamstring. So learned a little something too.
That's right. That's right. So we can't say for sure if this is solved, right? You can't.
No.
It's just a hamstring. Could pop again. You just never know. But once upon a time when I was doing athletic things, I had a problem with my knees, and I asked a doctor, what's going on here? And it was a non-contact injury, and this doctor told me, well, 95% of non-contact injuries are due to an imbalance. And maybe it's not 95; it was some dramatic majority, and that always stuck with me. It makes a lot of sense, if you had an imbalance. And a lot of times what happens when guys do get injuries, you train one, the thing that's not injured while the other thing that is injured, falls behind. So that makes a lot of sense. My whole thing, and I will just not stop on this, is just the indictment on the last strength and conditioning and really training staff. Like it's really unfortunate that it seems like this issue was probably simple. This probably didn't need to be some 2-year mystery. I get it in during the season, it's a little harder to do what you got to do, maybe from a training or a strength perspective. But they had the offseason between his rookie year and last year. Figure it out, and we've talked a lot about, they appear not to have been warming up properly, right? Oh, they're warming up longer now and all of that. But to not be able to identify an imbalance, to me, it just seems like a real fundamental miss. And that's not maybe as dramatic as not warming up properly as a fundamental miss, but there seem to be a lot of fundamental holes going on there. And so I not to keep beating down on that staff, but it's great to see that we have real information here. It's great to see that hey, yeah, it appears there has been a problem identified. There is an apparent solution. Hey, look, the athlete's doing great, right? Like he's out there running. Mm-hmm. So that's where, for me, I'm very excited and very optimistic just seeing him out there running around, getting the news that we've gotten about the asymmetry. Since here Tyler's got a comment about that. Asymmetric issues are pretty common knowledge in the medical field. From what I've seen people say, it makes me think how the last staff didn't know this. Yeah, we're all sort of throwing our hands up going, really? And Chris adding in, I hear it's like an 8 to 10% imbalance now. Wants to get down to 6, down from, it was around 20.
Right.
It just seems like a real bad oversight, like if you're talking about some kind of rare, uncommon issue, man, that's forgivable, right? Like, what can you do? This just seemed really bad. Am I overreacting, Tim?
No, it does. And that's kind of what my initial reaction was, like, why didn't they find this sooner? But there were a couple things to point out too. Like Christian Watson also mentioned that part of it was due to coming back a little too quickly from the injuries, not giving it enough time to heal and be able to train the injured hamstring. So it was fatigue, and it was fatiguing the hamstring that was working properly, that wasn't injured, because it was taking on, so much of the imbalance. The other thing too is he went to University of Wisconsin to get this diagnosis and get checked out by their doctors. And it's not like he just went there to, we're picking a school in Wisconsin. He's going to look at it. they were given grant money by the NFL to do research specifically into hamstring injuries and like why they happen, how to fix them, cause and effect on all sort of that. So he was going to experts who are really focused on that region of the body. Him and Stokes both went. So we haven't heard anything from Eric Stokes, and hopefully we will soon about what his issues are, what they found out. But it might be on the surface. I agree. Like, how could they have not picked up on this sooner? But maybe this was something that needed deeper research, that needed more time dedicated to it, that needed experts to really dive into that area to find the cause of it. But yeah, I mean, it's something that you would think they would be able to test for and know from a medical standpoint, whether it's the medical team that didn't find this, the strength and conditioning staff, whoever it may be. You would think they would be able to pick up on it, or at least have like, hey, this could be part of the reason. Let's test. Let's find out. I don't know. It sucks that he's had to go through all this and that it took going to get, looked at by researchers, but at least now it seems like they know what the issue is and what's causing the problem, and it's just a matter of fixing it. And he's gone about doing that. It's been a huge area of focus for him, just the knowledge that he has and the fact that he's gotten it down to, what he's saying, 8 to 10% that he's at right now is great. He's just going to have to continue to maintain that. I'm sure for the rest of his career, his hamstrings are going to be a key part of his training and his strengthening and his, it's an area of focus for him. Like, he can never let up, and if he gets through a season without a hamstring injury, say, okay, I'm good there. Like, this is always going to be an issue probably for him that he needs to be aware of. I'm glad that they finally figured out what it is, but it's confusing why they couldn't have figured it out sooner. And I also am hesitant to say that it's fixed, because I won't believe that until I actually see him on the field every week playing games when the regular season starts. I hope this is the end of it. I hope it's fixed, but time's going to tell with that.
Yeah. Well, and you're a nicer guy than I am, Tim. I'm willing to give them some benefit of the doubt, but there's too many areas now where I'm going, man, you missed over there and over there. Like, maybe this over here wasn't a coincidence, and there's
a reason why he cleared out the strength and conditioning staff.
True.
So
yeah, there's a reason why they replaced them.
Yeah.
And it's good that they're in problem solving mode. And this comes back to, how do we shape our fan perspective, right? A lot of times what I say is listen to the things that coaches and players say that they don't have to. In this case, you have to kind of take some context clues, right? If they hadn't figured it out, you'd be getting a bunch of vague blah, blah, blah. Like, think what happened with Bakhtiari, right? Like, you just wouldn't know. You wouldn't know anything, and then all of a sudden one day he's gone. If they hadn't figured it out, or at least believed that they figured it out, certainly it may not be 100%. Oh, we thought it was this, maybe it's that. But they have information, they have a lead. You can see the effort, right? There's action in the direction of figuring it out. Those are all the things that you want to see, right? If you're getting just this sort of vague, like, hey, make this question go away kind of answer, that's when you should probably have a little bit higher degree of concern. But yeah, and so again, back to Michael Redden jumping back in with us, you would think that testing individual leg strength after rehab would be standard. I certainly agree. I have actually seen that firsthand take place. So again, kind of wondering how it didn't take place in this situation. But yeah, and then Tyler jumps in with a related comment. I heard a guy say the Packers staff for in-season stuff is all about maintenance. Off-season is where they heal their bodies. Sounds like a fair point. Again, I'm willing to accept that. But they've had that offseason, right? Like, you had Christian Watson having the issues in his rookie season. You have the offseason, and then you have the 2023 season, the issues come back. that's where you didn't get this type of problem-solving effort, it didn't seem like, last offseason. You know what I mean? It's frustrating. But we are, again, we're Monday morning quarterbacking here. The problem's already been solved, right? New team is in there. It's just interesting when you look at it going, gosh, I hope Watson's, hamstring's going to be okay. And there's several folks that love throwing around the term, the guy's made of glass. Again, I like to clarify, you say that about a guy who can't take contact, which those guys are out there. Christian Watson's injuries are not due to contact, right? Pulling a hammy is just pulling a hammy. That has nothing to do with getting hit by somebody. I'd argue he's tough, man. You've seen him take good hits. You've seen him break tackles and run after the catch. He's a tough dude. He's big. He's a big guy. Big guys usually aren't made of glass. So yeah, it's one of those things that if they weren't solving it, you probably wouldn't get more information on it. And yeah, to the point about Stokes, we still haven't heard any findings on his issues, even though LaFleur's very optimistic. I'll take LaFleur's optimism because he hasn't been too much of a BSer. He's had a few moments where you can tell he's covering for something, but he doesn't. Again, this is kind of like, let's take what he doesn't have to say and for what it's worth. He doesn't have to say he's in the best shape of his life. He doesn't have to be overly optimistic about this. Again, we saw how they treated Bakhtiari for a couple of years when they just weren't sure. And we saw how they treated Stokes last year. They never were very certain about him last year. So it's a change of tune that we're seeing. So I just pick up on the context clues to see where should your optimism be. Do we need to write these guys off and hope for another solution? When it comes to Stokes and Watson, I'd say absolutely not. And this season could change that for the better or for the worse. And if you've listened to the show, you're no stranger to the fact that I am absolutely stock up on Watson, right? Like I can't wait to see him unleashed on the NFL with a full healthy season. I think it's just going to be awesome, and I am going to be insufferable on Twitter with all of the Christian Watson receipts. But we don't know as much about Stokes. It just seems like they have a similar optimism around him. Anybody else? I don't. We got to look into it. We don't have real bad injuries other than those two. They're huge question marks, right?
Thankfully,
I think that's about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So it's interesting. Those are probably two of the bigger storylines. What are the OTA takeaways is where we're at right now. And seeing those guys running around in OTAs is a good sign because, again, talking about things you don't have to do. You don't have to run around OTAs. If you have any risk of re-injuring your hamstring, you're not running around in OTAs. No. You might jog around. You might hang out. But you're not putting any kind of risk on that if it exists. So that's where I'd say seeing them run around. And Christian Watson was sprinting. I didn't see any footage of Stokes. I could have overlooked that. But
he was full go. They're both full go, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, great sign for this time of the offseason. If anything, they could have sat them out just as a precaution, just because, right? Just because you don't need to have them run around at OTAs. So, yeah, I'm very, very excited to see what can happen. Obviously, and here, Michael jumping in with a good point about Stokes. We need Stokes to make up that speed for press man. Yeah, he's fast. Like, let's not forget how fast this dude is. Christian Watson, we haven't forgotten that. We know how fast he is. But in this system where, and we talk about, like I said, OTA takeaways here. In this system with Hafley where they're talking about aggression, they're talking about not thinking as much, talking about some more press man coverage than we've seen. There was let's see here. Kenny Clark had some comments about some things, and I don't know if I'll have the exact quote here, but it was something to the effect of, now we get to pin our ears back and go, right? And I don't know if you read that or not, Tim, but it was, just getting his thoughts on, getting your first feel in the system, and, you got some install during OTAs, you get a little bit of a taste for what the Hafley system's going to be, and these were his comments. A guy like Kenny Clark is not a hype guy. He's not a guy that you hear from a lot. He's not a guy who, again, I'll go right back to it. These guys don't have to say things. They're in the dead of the off season. You can say, yeah, things are going good. It's good to be here. It's just the OTAs. We'll see how camp goes. Like, you can very easily give non-answers if you want to as a player right now. So the fact that somebody like a Kenny Clark, he's been in the league a long time. He's still a young dude, but he's smart. He's played well. He's played at an all-pro level in this league. Him being excited about this and saying, kind of articulating the differences being that, before we had to be reserved and now we get to pin our ears back and go get the ball, go get the quarterback.
Right.
That gets me excited. And this time of year, we have to look at the tidbits and the little things about what's going on. Those are things that get me excited because those are very easily things that they don't have to put out there. And yet that they do, because they're human too, right? For this thing, they want, if they're enthusiastic about it, if they're excited about it, they want to share that. So yeah, that's one of my main takeaways is really just the injuries, seeing Stokes and Watson out there, hearing what some of these guys have to say about the Halfley system. Everything sounds really positive. And then obviously Enoch Bari, we talked about him. But yeah, so those were my main OTA takeaways. Did you have any others, Tim?
No, but just to further your point about the defense and Kenny Clark, I saw similar comments from Devontae Wyatt about the new defense, about how they're going to be attack now. And he doesn't have to worry about read and react or having 1,000 things going on in his head. It's just attack, get in the backfield, and cause havoc. And he feels like he's built for that. Like, that's what he does best. And sure seems like that's what he would do best. So, yeah, I mean, it's all words right now. It's nice to hear Kenny Clark say stuff like that and other players on the defense say how they're going to attack. It's awesome, but let's wait and see what happens. It's kind of like that
For
time
sure.
of year where you can go around the league and everybody's optimistic, which is great. But it's cool to think about what could be. It's going to be a big change defensively from what they had been running. And they're going to try to get there. They're going to try to blow up the backfield on every play. It's not going to be two gapping and holding your point and playing passive. They're going to play aggressive. Will it work? We'll see.
Well, speaking of Kenny Clark, Michael Redden jumps back in and says, do you think we should re-sign Clark? And that third contract, man, a lot of folks have pointed out the Packers don't like to give those third contracts. I think Kenny Clark is a unique situation in that he is still very young, relatively, right? He's still in his 20s. He's a good leader in the locker room from what we can tell. He's obviously, like I mentioned, an accomplished player on the field, and I don't think that his best days are behind him on the field. I personally would love to see them give him a third contract. And I don't think that there's anybody else really forcing him out yet. And the D-line group is deep, and they're good. You got Wyatt in there, and he's a first rounder and all of that. But I just, a lot of times with a guy like Kenny Clark, what ends up happening, and the reason the Packers don't give a third contract is because they've done the work to replace the guy essentially, and that's why you see the attitude you see from some of these exiting veterans, because they see it happen. Rodgers, he said it, right? I'm playing with my replacement and that kind of thing, and so they see that happen. They know that that's where this game goes eventually. I don't see that has happened on the Packers defensive line. I don't see that that's a group that you can just say, all right, we can go ahead and get rid of Kenny Clark and we'll be good. And not, again, because necessarily entirely of his ability, but because of the leadership, because, again, his veteran presence and how long he's been in the league and just being sort of a staple in that room. That's why I think that he should get a third contract, and I think they will try to give him a third contract. I think it'll be interesting to see how they value him, though. Right? Like, they tried to give Aaron Jones a contract, and we see how that went. Even Devontae Adams, right? Like, that didn't go very well, and then they finally gave him something respectable at the end when it was too late. And quick shout out here before we move on too far to Stephen Smith. I don't know if that's Stephen A. Smith. That'd be cool. Sorry, the guy in the glasses. Can't take him seriously. Tried for a bit. It's okay. Don't take me too seriously. I am only a Packers fan. Just here having fun, hanging out. So don't take me too seriously. But do have a good time, I hope.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, Tim, do you think they should give him a third contract to Kenny Clark?
Yeah, I do. I think they should. I would. But you made the point. It's how they value him. And a lot of defensive tackles have gotten paid over the last year or so. So his price is going to be up there.
Yeah.
And their history of giving third contracts, they generally don't do that to non-quarterbacks. We don't see that very much. That I would do it. My gut says that they end up not re-signing him and he moves on, which is going to be a shame and unfortunate. But I think they'll put a price tag on it, and it's going to be much lower than what he thinks he can get. And based on what all these other defensive tackles have signed for recently, they're I can't see them giving him enough to satisfy him and beating the price of some of these other contracts that have been given out. It just doesn't feel like it's something the Packers do, especially, on that third. I know he's not 30, but he is on a third contract, and they're going to set a value on it, and they probably won't budge from it. I could see them trying to sign him and negotiating, but I think there's going to be a real hard line that they take. Like, we're not going to go past this point, and it's just going to be too far of what he wants and what they are offering to make it work. But if it was me, yeah, I would definitely re-sign him.
Well, we'll find out. I think the order of operations is going to be important. What I mean by that is, I think they have to get the Love contract done first and foremost, and then see how that affects everything else. And hopefully that's kind of a domino effect. You get Love signed, and then maybe you do get, an extension for Clark or, something else locked down. I think it's going to be interesting to see how the receiver group shapes up after this season. If you have a Dobbs or a Watson have a breakout year, do you go ahead and extend them before they get too expensive? That's probably on the radar. As far as like what is Goot looking at and who's competing for what salary cap. That's all what I think is going to factor in there with Kenny Clark. So it's going to be interesting. I think we have to brace ourselves to lose him and not, that he doesn't get the third contract. But I hope he does. I do hope they keep him. So too. I haven't seen, as far as, like we were saying, I haven't seen a drop off in the play. He doesn't look like a guy who's like, all right, time to move on. He looks like a guy you could still continue building around, which would be pretty phenomenal considering he's still, I believe, the last draft pick of Ted Thompson.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So pretty impressive there. But and then our Showers jumped in with us. Fell asleep. That's all right, man. All right. You can go back and catch up. But he says DL guys are the safest bet from 30 to 34 years old. Not safe, but safer than others. Yeah, you're not wrong. It's pretty common to see guys play into their 30s on the D line for whatever reason. They've got that durability, and again, Kenny Clark hasn't even really dealt with a lot of injuries. I can't think off the top of my head.
No, he's always been healthy.
Yeah, he's stayed really healthy. Which tells you he probably takes really good care of himself in the off season. So he's. I'll say this: if there is an exception where they would make, to do a third contract, he's got to be in that exception territory. Just the combination of his attributes. So we shall see how that one unfolds. But yeah, Michael makes the point, since we didn't draft a replacement, we need a couple more years. I think that's where their head's at, right? I think that, there's a reason you didn't see them take a D-line or a pass rusher in this draft. They have a better idea of the outlook, next 3 to 5 years of where they want that salary cap allocated and, how it's going to fall and all of that. So who knows? We'll find out. Again, we see Kingsley Enagbari come out here at OTAs running around without a brace on after thinking he tore his ACL a few months ago. So you just you got to have a little bit of faith in the guys in the building guys and gals in the building with the information, and so far they're navigating things pretty well. We don't have a whole lot to complain about right now as Packers fans. We certainly could find hairs to split, but I trust the folks in the building at this point. So let's see here. As far as anything else goes, some other stuff that happened over this past week, very minor, few chatters about potential acquisitions for the Packers still. So Andy Herman, fun guy to listen to in the Packerverse. He had a rumor, or not, I shouldn't say a rumor, just some fun speculation about a trade for Jonathan Allen. I thought that was an interesting idea as we're sitting here talking about D-line and leadership and future of that group. I don't know. Is Jonathan Allen younger than Kenny Clark?
Yeah, I would think so. And he got paid, so
right. So that I think, and what Andy might be looking at there is he got paid, so you have the contract there, what it is, instead of having to play a guessing game with Kenny Clark later on. I don't know. It's an interesting thought. I don't know that they make a move like that because Jonathan Allen's a pretty big player. I think it would take a lot of capital to make that move. And then as far as potential free agent acquisitions, one name that came up that I saw, and I cannot remember who put this one out there, but I'm sure it's not such an original idea that they'll be upset that we took it. Xavier Howard is still out there, cornerback. I think at one point he had 10 interceptions in a season or something like that. Pretty good DB. I will say this. I don't think they lack leadership in that room right now. An acquisition like that might be a good injury response. But one thing that you can't measure it, so it's going to be overlooked, but is probably very important and happening right now is development of chemistry, especially with DBs. There's something about DBs working together. Those guys, the closer they are, the better they're going to work together. I don't think you want to disrupt that, right? And Xavier Howard makes sense maybe if you have Jair and that Stokes can't go. All right, man. It's Stokes he's just not going to make it. Okay, now you got some question marks behind him. But knowing what they know about Stokes and feeling the way that they do about him, and they haven't added anybody else, tells me that he's ready to go. And then at that point, now you're talking about your nickel position, which is up for grabs and multiple rooms, right? It's not just corners, right? There's a couple of those safeties that are going to have a safe at that position as well. You just don't need the body. You don't, and I don't know who Xavier Howard is. I mean, I obviously know the player. I don't know the person. You don't want to risk, in my opinion, taking a volatile personality and dumping it into a group that is growing together right now. So I don't know that that's one that I would look at unless it's a response to an injury. But is there any other acquisition ideas you think make sense out there, man?
No, nothing that I've seen that's realistic. The Xavier Howard thing, he's been hurt a ton. That doesn't make sense to me either. Right now, I'm pretty comfortable with how the roster is. I think the draft addressed a lot of their needs. It really built depth, and there's competition at every position. We've talked about that previous podcast. There's competition all over, and that's what they needed. I would never stop looking. I would always, who's out there, who may get released. This is the time of year in the past where they have picked up guys here and there. So maybe it's something they do again. And I, always be aware who's available. But I think right now you got to be pretty comfortable with the roster, see what they look like in mini camp, see what they look like in training camp. And then, if there's a spot that, an injury replacement or you need better depth, guys aren't stepping up, guys aren't, taking the second or third year jumps, or the rookies aren't ready to play, you address it in training camp or a cut down day. But right now, I think they have enough. I really don't see a position that just screams like they're really short here. Maybe the offensive line. I still think they could use another guard inside. But even that, I kind of want to see what you have first before you go out and acquire anybody else. I think what they've done so far in the offseason has built up enough depth and competition where they're in a pretty good spot. And, let's see what these young players can do.
Right. No, I do agree. And are jumping in, LVN developing into a monster would doom a Clark extension or Carl Brooks. They have options. I don't know. I don't know about that.
Maybe.
I think that they you're right though. They do have options.
You
Carl,
still have
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. You have Vanessa's only going in the second year, so you don't even have to think of a contract for him for another couple years.
Right.
So
And he's on the
timeline's different.
outside, whereas Kenny's on the inside.
Yeah.
Carl Brooks is an interesting one. Yeah, if he has a breakout season, that
Yeah.
might make it a little bit easier for them to start moving away from Kenny Clark. And again, Devontae Wyatt, if he has a pretty good season, there's several guys in that D line group. Like I said, they're deep. It's a good group. It just seems like Kenny Clark is the definite leader of the group. And
Absolutely.
without him, in my opinion, it definitely degrades. You take a step backwards there, and that group could totally prove us wrong with a performance this season. You just never know, but that's just the way it looks right now. I think LVN developing into a monster is going to be it's inevitable anyway, so that's going to happen.
Let's hope so.
LVN and Rashawn Gary getting their first 10 sack seasons the same season would be pretty cool. 10 plus, put that out there. We don't limit these guys. Yeah, I mean, it's hard, as you start doing that, you start looking down the roster in the depth chart. It's like, dang, man, there's a lot of guys to get excited about right now. Carl Brooks is definitely, in my opinion, Carl Brooks is the equivalent of Dontavian Wicks on the defense as far as upside goes. There's a lot of people very, very excited about the potential of Dontavian Wicks, and that is not to diminish the potential of any other receiver on the roster. But when it comes to, just that, like, dang, like this guy, he really could be great. I feel the same way about Carl Brooks. And you got him at similar points of the draft last year, same class, obviously. I'm very, very high on Carl Brooks. I'm very excited about him. I think, though, that he's a different player than Kenny Clark. If anybody is going to replace Kenny Clark that's on the roster right now, I think it would have to be Devontae Wyatt.
Yeah.
They similar body types, closer together as far as like what their skill sets are and what their the guy between the ears. Talk about that sometimes. They both seem like a similar type dude, very quiet leader. But yeah, that I think is a fun situation to watch unfold. We do, however, have a troll in our audience that wants some attention. Seth Glenn out there, shout out. Go Cowboys, playoff game was a fluke. If you watched that game and you thought it was a fluke, okay.
It goes to show you that Bears fans aren't the only delusional fans out there.
Oh man, no, I'll only pick on him for a minute. Seth is my brother-in-law. He's jumping in to specifically play the troll, and I am okay with that. I appreciate him jumping in and checking out the show. That playoff game was absolutely not a fluke, though. So, and he knows that. Yeah, so I think there's a lot to be excited about in this group, and it's a fair point that at some point these guys rise up and could make it easier to move on from Kenny Clark. We just haven't seen that yet. This season has loads of potential for that to happen for sure. And then, Matthew jumping in with the question, how about a receiver with the experience to help out the rookies? Right now, I don't think that you need to add anything to that receiver room. And I was just, raving about Dontavian Wicks, but they're not old guys, right? But Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs now going into their third year, they've got more experience than most guys going into their third year. Having now both played with Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love, you've been in the same offensive system for, this many years. It hasn't changed. I don't see them needing to bring in a veteran receiver unless there's an injury that maybe happens. But even then, the depth of this room is it's impressive, and it's hard to quantify that and measure that. if you're not watching it, like, we're Packers fans. We watch these things. We watch these players. We get to know who they are. We see the highlights. Other teams' fans don't see these things, right? Most people outside of the Packerverse don't know who Dontavian Wicks is yet, and so don't take your perceptions from outside of things here. This group is talented, man, and they're talented in different ways, and we're not going to have a whole segment about the Packers receivers because I will get out of control. But yeah, I would say there's just not a need for that. Even if you do, say, have Christian Watson's injuries continue to flare up, you don't need to bring in a veteran to replace to fill that presence. You've got Bo Melton, who's maybe not every bit as fast as Christian Watson, but close enough. Like, they're right there. They're both very fast individuals. But you've got Dontavian Wicks, who's ready to step in there. You've got, these guys are ready to go. Jaden Reed, let's not forget, he broke Packers rookie receiving records, right? Like, this guy who in some conversations is kind of a second thought. In others, he's not. But, so that's where it's like when it comes to the receiver group, I wouldn't expect any additions to that group. Probably not even next offseason, to be honest with you. None of these guys have contracts coming up next season, so you can keep all of them. So I'd say get used to this group for a while because it's a fun one to watch. They're good, they're deep, they're young, and you just don't need to add a vet, in my opinion. I don't know. What do you think, Tim?
No, I wouldn't add anybody to that room. I think let these guys compete with each other for playing time and snaps, and you said it. They're deep. They're very talented. They need the snaps. They need the experience. There's no reason to bring in somebody else, to bring in a veteran. Nah, I'm perfectly fine with the room as it is, and let's hope they're all healthy. And man, they're extremely talented. So it'll be the battle there in training camp to see, who the top guys are going to be, who's going to get the most snaps, how they're going to use certain ones. That's going to be really fun to watch just because of how much potential and how much talent is in that receiver room.
Absolutely. Our Showers reminding us, don't sleep on Malik either. Malik Heath having a say at some point. Yeah, big fans of Malik Heath here. We were really excited watching him last preseason. I've said multiple times, he's a bully. I want a bully in my receiving room. So yeah, they are deep in that room, man, and it's fun to watch. It is cool, if y'all were watching, about 12 years ago now, when you had what was it? It was, let's see if I can do all this all together. Was it Jennings, Driver, Jordy, Cobb, Finley? It was 2011, right?
Yeah.
The 2011 team was nuts.
James Jones.
Yeah, that was the other one in there. The 2011 team was absolutely nuts, and it was just next man up was just as capable. I remember how much fun it was to just play anybody because nobody could talk crap because it was just like this next receiver coming up giving you a headache, and this group feels like that. So yeah, very excited about this group. You guys got me all started on the receivers. We're almost an hour and a half in here. You guys got to get me all worked up about the receivers. No, now let's see here. We got R also saying, yeah, crazy thing about the depth is it helps them hold their values. That's what we were just talking about, is that competition breeds success. When you've got receivers 6 and 7 competing for a spot on the roster, receiver like 1 through 4 and 5 feel that. They know that. There's no room to mess up. There's no room to just sort of take a day off. So yeah, absolutely good one there. There's a lot of comments here. I'm trying to keep up with you guys. There was another one that I wanted to. Oh yeah, Chris here. You had a question. Who do you think they'll put next to Quay? That's a good question. I really think that Cooper will make his way up there immediately. He seems like an excellent player. He doesn't have to be the intellectual leader in the linebackers because he'll be next to Quay. He'll be surrounded by veterans on the D-line and in the secondary. I don't think it'll be hard at all for him to step in there. And he's got good leadership. Isaiah McDuffie's been around. He knows the system. He's a smart dude. I think his limitations are as his abilities on the field, it seems like. It seems like a lot of guys like McDuffie. He's just not a superstar athlete, and just
Right.
he doesn't have that massive potential. He's just a good player, and you need those guys. But guys like that help guys like Cooper develop. So yeah, I think that the ability will be impossible to hold off the field, especially when you've got veterans around him. But I don't know. Do you think he'll beat him out, Tim?
I think ultimately, yeah, it'll be Cooper. It might not be from day one. It might be McDuffie just because he's the veteran in there. But eventually, Cooper's talent is just going to win out, and I think he'll end up being the guy next to Quay. We'll see three of them too on the field. A little, I don't know how much, probably not a ton, but at times they're going to play three linebackers too. So it'll be McDuffie and Cooper with Quay. But I think ultimately, as the season goes on, maybe it will be right away. It depends on how quickly Cooper can develop. But I think as the season goes on, it'll definitely be Cooper as the guy next to Quay full time.
Yeah, it seems like that's where it'll go. We got the Cowboys fan jumping back in. He's not being a troll this time. He's actually got a good question. Now that teams have had a season to watch tape on Love, how do you see the next season going for him compared to Dak's first year? ... It went downhill from there. It did, dude. But I'll say this: there were people calling that early on about Dak, and I was in disagreement. I remember the 2016 season thinking, dang, man, you got Dak, you got Zeke. They're both rookies. Like, you got a really young nucleus there. That team early on, I thought they had a stretch where it was like they were going to win a championship, man. They looked like they were going to be a problem for the NFC. And Jerry just found a way, man. Found a way to wreck the whole thing. And I don't even know what to say about that team right now in this offseason. But I don't think that Jordan Love and Dak Prescott are the same kind of dude. Certainly in almost opposite situations, right? I mean, the Packers don't even have an owner. Dak's got the worst owner in the league. I mean, the most obnoxious owner in the league. He's not the worst. But I think it's just very different situations, and Dak got thrown to the fire as a rookie, which I think that helped him a little bit because he was too young to understand what he didn't know. So he's able to just sort of play off of adrenaline. Love had 3 seasons to just sit there and watch how it's done, by the MVP. So it's just 2 different situations. That's why I don't think that you'll have a drop off from Love, because I don't think the reason that he was good last season was because defenses just didn't know what he was doing. You know what I mean? Like, it's not, well, now that defenses know his tendencies, he's not going to be good. I don't think that's the case. What do you think?
No, he got better as the year went on, and the second half of his season was much better than the first half. So yeah. I could kind of see that point being, legitimate if the first half of his year was really good, and then he kind of tailed off when teams did get more tape on him. But if anything, the more he played, the better he got. So, yeah, I mean, it's something to think about. Like, teams are going to adjust. They're going to, come up with new strategies of how to attack the Packers offense, how to attack Jordan Love. But the fact is, I mean, he played great down the stretch last year. And the more he played, the more consistent he got. So it's always possible, but I don't expect there to be a drop off in his play just because, teams are going to have more film on him. I think that would have started to show signs of that last season. It was actually the opposite. Like, they had more tape, and, he was getting blitzed a ton the second half of the season. And it didn't matter because he just played so well that he was killing the blitz, and no matter what was presented to him as a quarterback up until the San Francisco game, he was just torching teams. So, yeah, I'm not too concerned about a drop-off in his play in the second year.
Yeah, and it's not to say that he'll go on and throw 60 touchdowns and no interceptions and win an MVP. Right. Is he going to have some bad games? Yeah, I think that there's growth. Growth is not linear, right? There's ups and downs in growth. But I don't think that there was anything about last season that was a fluke. And I don't think that the reason that you'll see Love take steps back is because he's been figured out. You know what I mean? I think it's just more of like it becomes a chess match. You know, you see Aaron Rodgers and Pat Mahomes and these guys struggle in certain situations against certain defenses, right? Aaron Rodgers couldn't figure out the 49ers defense for whatever reason. You know, he just had some kind of mental block against that defense. And so that's where I think Love still has some development to do. He has to go from now, right now he's very much being led by LaFleur. Like LaFleur's calling the plays, LaFleur's putting together, and Stenavich putting together the strategy. Love is not yet playing chess against a defensive coordinator, right? That's what Rodgers does. Rodgers plays chess against defensive coordinators now. And he's really good at it, right? Peyton Manning was really good at it. Guys like Ray Lewis would talk about how much they hated playing against Peyton Manning. That's where I think you'll see Love show regression through that learning curve and that growing pain of figuring that game out. And somebody mentioned it, Mahomes-ish. R said, what if Love's is Mahomes-ish? Here we go. Fingers crossed because, there are elements of that in his game. Mahomes is a pretty special quarterback. I don't think that it's fair to. Yeah, I don't think it's fair to just. We just won't compare, right? Nobody says what if Brady is like Manning or Manning is like Brady, right? It's Manning and Brady, and if Love is the real deal, it'll be Love and Mahomes, right? You won't talk about it as Love like Mahomes or Mahomes like Love. They'll be each other's villain. They're close enough in age for that too. They'll be around fighting each other for a while. So, but what I do think is you saw Mahomes struggle a little bit there after he had success in the league. He had those early years where he's kind of playing off of adrenaline, being, again, led by Andy Reid. He's not the one playing chess against the defense. He's just out there playing ball, doing what he's told. You could see it there for a few seasons where he was struggling and everybody's, what's wrong with Pat Mahomes? That was when he was making that transition, figuring that out, going from being told what to do by coach and figuring out how to play chess against the defense. That is not going to be an easy transition to make, and guys are going to make mistakes in doing that. One thing I would call out, and I don't remember how this progressed, but go back and look at the timing of when Brady said this. There was one point later in Brady's career where somebody interviewed him and asked him, have you thought about retirement? Where you at? And he kind of laughed. He's like, are you kidding me? I got the answers to the test. Why would I stop now? And then he went off and won a few more Super Bowls. So it's just like, that's the kind of things. It can take time, and you can be good without being that quarterback. But there is a difference, right? There's a version of Pat Mahomes before he started playing chess against defenses, and now Pat Mahomes is kind of entering this Jedi phase that's pretty terrifying for the rest of the NFL. Can Jordan Love do that? Hopefully. I think he can. I think he will. I think he's got certainly the leadership around him to guide him to that. But that is where I think you should expect to see him struggle. Not necessarily just see a drop-off because they figured him out and now he's going to look like an average quarterback that throws 15 touchdowns and 15 interceptions, that kind of thing. I don't think you're going to see that. I don't think Jordan Love has that in him. But I don't know. What do you think there, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not expecting the drop off. I think he showed enough the second half of last year that it's legit. It's not something that was a fluke. He did it against some good teams, some good defenses. He did it without having his full cast of weapons for long stretches of the season. It's going to take time, and there's a ton of growth he can still make. I mean, he's going into his second year as a starter. So, he's far from a finished product, and there's a lot more that he can improve at. Obviously, decision-making at times, his footwork, things like that, he hopefully should get better at. And if he does, it's obviously just going to increase the ceiling that he has as a quarterback. I'm very optimistic about what he's going to be. I think he's already proven that he's one of the top quarterbacks in the league. But, I mean, I get the argument, he's got to do it again to really prove himself. Sure, if you want to make that, but I'm comfortable saying that he's going to do it again, and he's only going to get better. And I think the situation around him will get better if guys are healthier and just the experience that they're going to get as an offense together, because they're all young and they're all going to gain this experience together, come and grow together. And that can obviously make his game and his, his stats and his overall growth that much more, substantial. So, yeah, the sky's the limit for Jordan Love. I don't want to go into talking about Pat Mahomes, because Pat Mahomes is on a different level than everyone else right now, and Jordan's got a long way to go to get to that. But I absolutely think he could be one of the top, handful of quarterbacks in the NFL for a long time.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you guys are throwing out some good points in the comments here. So Chris jumping up with Love is number one on third and fourth down. That is a very good stat right there. I mean, when you talk about being under pressure, being in pressure situations, the do or die situations, that's where you want your quarterback to be the best. So good start there from him. R with a good point. LaFleur being figured out is a thing. Seems unlikely, though. I agree. I think that's unlikely. He shows a willingness, like what we talked about earlier in the episode when we're talking about these joint practices. To me, LaFleur shows a willingness and it's sort of a hunger to learn, to adapt. He doesn't seem like he's at a complacent point yet in his career where I've got my system and it works. Maybe if he wins a Super Bowl, he'll change his ways and that's what he'll go. But I don't think you got to worry about him being figured out at least this season or maybe even next season. But yeah, it's interesting how these things develop. I agree. Let's leave the Pat Mahomes stuff alone for now. But the optimism around Love, I think, is very warranted. I don't think there's any reason people shouldn't think that he could get better this next season, be a top 5 QB, lead this team to compete for maybe a Super Bowl. We'll see. And at some point, I think I saw one of you guys mention, oh, yeah, here we go. Chris says Stroud versus Love. I think they're going to be the next two greats coming up. That one will be a fun battle to watch unfold. I think that will be very, right along the lines there with Mahomes, right? If you're wondering who's going to be the next kind of generation of quarterbacks leading this league, Mahomes isn't that old. He's going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
And I think that similar to the way that like Brady and Rodgers even sort of got grouped together as a generation, even though they came in the league, a few years apart. This to me feels like that cohort, right? You got Mahomes, you got Love, you got Stroud. I could sit here and rattle off a bunch. You got Lamar Jackson, but the quarterback play, I think Love is. Again, we're biased, we're fans here, but as a Packers fan, you've got to feel like you've got one of the top 5 quarterbacks over the next 10 years on your team right now.
Absolutely.
Right now, based on what we know right now. That's how you could feel. But we'll see. That's why they got to play the game. It'll be a lot of fun, I think, to watch unfold. Hopefully we get to watch Love get better. I mean, I think that as fans, right, realistic or not, what we want to see is we want to see Love be better than Rodgers, right? That's what I want to see.
Right.
And, not because we have any feelings about Rodgers, but yeah, you want to see players, great players be better, the next guy be better than the next guy, and so, we all wanted to see Rodgers be better than Favre. I think at the beginning, none of us believed that was realistic, and look what happened. And now, so you might feel like Love being better than Rodgers is not realistic. A couple Super Bowl wins might change your mind on that real quick. So, we'll see how this unfolds. But I love where they're at, no pun intended. I certainly like where the Packers are at now better than where the Cowboys were at in 2016. Even though, Seth, I was admittedly worried about the Cowboys back then. I'm glad that I didn't have anything to worry about. That turned out well. And Seth, with another troll question, we'll entertain it because we're at a fun part of the podcast here. When will the NFL make the Packers get a new stadium? Never. because we don't sell out. We have tradition. Lambeau Field will always be there, and it will not be renamed. We're speaking that into existence, and I swear the Packers board that decides to rename Lambeau Field will have a riot outside. Okay, I'm just kidding. YouTube might take us down. We don't want to do anything like that. Just jokes, folks. Just jokes. But, yeah, they'll never leave Lambeau. So, yeah, that's I think that's all we got this week, man. We went an hour and a half into things, hour 45 minutes here almost. So really appreciate you guys jumping in with us, joining us here tonight. We had some fun with y'all. Sorry that we weren't here last night. We were enjoying Memorial Day celebrations and festivities. So appreciate you guys jumping in with us tonight. Packers fans, thanks for hanging out with us on the Packers Weekly Podcast, part of PackersTalk.com network. Check us out on YouTube, Twitter, or X, or Twix. I think Twix is the one we're going to try to bring into play here. Facebook, Instagram, all of them. Spike that like button for us if y'all enjoyed this episode. And please subscribe to the Packers Talk YouTube channel. We will see y'all next week, Packers fans. Go, Pack, go!